everyone. It's a new year and a new version of our virtual conference series, Reimagine 2021. I'm your co-host, Ashlie Meredith, Head of Education at MouseBelt Blockchain Accelerator, here to talk about building our New Year resolutions with another university segment. Today, we're pleased to be joined by Philip Greenwald, CEO and founder of TAP, and he was the former Associate Director of Technology, Lead Technology Advisor at Harvard Innovation Labs. Welcome, Philip. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Ashlie. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining us. As you may know, we have a global audience tuning in. Many of our viewers are students. We have our university program that has engaged students from 100 universities in 24 countries all over the world. So I always like to ask my interviewers right away just to kind of tell us their story from how you got to where you are and kind of advice that you might give any entrepreneurs, any students watching who might want to do what you're doing.
Awesome. So went to college, got a degree in economics. Immediately after, started working at a bank, and that was not going well. So I started reading I don't know if the younger people are going to know this, but there used to be a very popular book series called the For Dummies series. There were these, yellow iconic covers that would be, whatever for dummies. And so I started reading PHP and MySQL for dummies after work every day, and would basically, teach myself to code. And then a little bit later, myself, a few other people, we ended up getting laid off from the bank. And so I was like, all right, I've wanted to do a startup since basically the day I was born. If I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So I started the worst named startup ever. It was called Avidest. And the whole idea was getting sort of like MIT students to build your website, or Harvard students to write a business plan for you. And it failed for many reasons. I didn't execute on it well. It wasn't a great solution to a problem. I mean, just a ton of reasons. But that did pivot into Code Undercover, which was a coding school to get people, which basically the idea was learn to code by building your own product. And people would come to us and say, hey, I want to build Uber for kittens. And so we would make a syllabus custom for them, where each lesson they learn how to build a little piece of the Uber for Kittens app, and through that learn to code. I started teaching workshops at a bunch of universities in Boston, Tufts, Boston College, a startup accelerator called Mass Challenge, and then eventually Harvard Innovation Labs. And after teaching a few semesters at Harvard Innovation Labs, the assistant technology director there at the time left and said, Phil, do you want my job? And I was like, to shorten his story, I said, sure. I actually said no at first, and then realized I was being stupid. And so then I worked at Harvard for a few years, advising technology teams and sort of doing a lot of their internal tech. I built their augmented and virtual reality studio. I oversaw the Makerspace for a little bit, specifically the education programs at the Makerspace. And now I'm working on TAP. We make these stickers that you can put on your phone. They allow anyone to touch their phone to yours and instantly exchange contact info. That can be, if you're, super public person, your Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, phone number, absolutely everything. And if you're pretty private, it could, just be your email. But the whole idea is to make it quicker and easier to communicate in the real world. And yes, I'm aware of this whole thing called COVID, and that the real world is kind of on the sidelines right now, but we expect it to return. And so the second part of your question was, what would I say to people, students who might want to do entrepreneurship or join it? I'd probably say don't. So I remember telling my grandfather when I was 16 or 17, that I had heard about this entrepreneurship thing and that's what I wanted to do. And he said, well, Phil, that's bullshit. That doesn't really mean anything. Come up with an idea, make the idea, build a product, execute on it. Have you done that? Do you know if that's what you want to do? And he was right. And so years, I had a few projects up until my first real entrepreneurial endeavor. But entrepreneurship is like tough. I really hate the word entrepreneurship because it makes it sound as if it really is a job title, entrepreneur, when really it's just it's figuring out how to make shit work for a long time. And in the end, it probably won't. Everyone knows the stat greater than they say it's something like 95% of startups fail. I'm convinced it's closer to 99. So I'd probably say don't. I'd say the reason to do it is, oh, this sounds cliche, but you can't do anything else. But I do recommend getting a job out of college first. I'm not one of those, go straight to entrepreneurship. Definitely do some shit you like on the side and, work on building some things. But I think a year or two in the professional world is a good idea. But quit immediately. Don't wait till you're 25. If you get into the professional world when you're 22, make a rule that you're going to quit when you're 24. And if you don't do that, it's not likely you're going to quit when you're 25. And if you don't do that, it's not likely you're going to quit when you're 26. So go in for a few years, but then make the decision to quit.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting. I'm glad that you shared, a story of failure. I think it's important for people to realize that finding the right problem to solve doesn't happen your first try. And I also appreciate the advice of getting out into the professional world, because I think that as a young person, you don't really know what kinds of problems are in need of solving. And I see, startup ideas all the time as an accelerator, as investors. And the ones that are most exciting are things that, people who worked in the corporate world or worked in a particular industry and say, hey, I used to work in restaurants, or I used to do this. And I saw a problem with the POS systems at the restaurants that we were, that I was buying. So now I'm in payments, or, whatever it is. So I think it's really good experience to get out into the world and see what problems need to be solved. And then also to recognize that you're going to fail a lot too at first.
Yeah. I think it's definitely having some experience to see what the real world problems are. But what I've noticed is people who do that, the first thing they do the second they graduate college, or the second they the second they graduate high school, if they don't go to college, but if they're a college grad and they decide to do a startup, they end up playing entrepreneur, that whole thing, entrepreneur, rather than actually being it. They've got family money that allows them to sort of coast, not intentionally, they didn't set out to coast, but if you don't have that gun to your head, and if you haven't had the feeling of being self-sufficient, or even slightly sufficient, but still taking some help, if there's not a real risk to you, and Barbara Corcoran talks a lot about this, and I think she's pretty right on this. It's very difficult to move quick enough and to to make your moves in startup world. Again, I don't think if your startup's your side gig, or if you do it right out of college, or if you have some sort of benefactor, I think it's hard to realize that everyone says a desire to change the world is the primary motivator of startups. And I don't think that's the case at all. The primary motivator as a startup founder is fear. What the hell happens if you fail, right? If you've taken a family friends round, right, losing that money. If you're right out of college and you spend 2 years on a startup and it even goes okay, like you don't make the scalable thing, but you make 50 grand a year, which is, bravo. That's impressive. Honestly, right out of college, to just start something that without taking funding and make 50 grand a year, that's impressive. But try convincing that to your next employer 2 years later when the startup fails. As Mark Cuban would say, man, I'm quoting the Sharks a lot tonight. As Mark Cuban would say, no, you shouldn't, it's not great to go into a startup having a backup plan. But if you go right after college, that just fear has to be the primary motivator. There's no way it won't be. And if you do it right after college, there's fear, but it's not that fear of once you've had a few years and you've tasted being self-sufficient. and then you've lost your savings. You've lost your savings. So yeah, again, every situation is different. So if it's right after college and your mother mortgages your house, sure, that's real fear. By the way, I don't recommend anyone doing that immediately either. But for the most part, I think people who do startups immediately after college, there's not as much fear.
Yeah.
And there's worse risk, and there's a lot of risk.
Yeah, gotta stay hungry, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Well, yeah, and then the advice, only do this if it's you can't imagine yourself doing anything else. I definitely got that advice in my previous life. So I run a university program now because of my background in academia. I was pursuing a PhD in philosophy, and that's pretty much what everyone tells you when you get to that level is don't do it. Don't do it unless you could do nothing else.
Don't do the
So
PhD, you're saying?
yeah,
Yeah.
because it's just that track, that world is just so competitive and doesn't pay very well. So it's just that's the advice that I've gotten before.
I think philosophy, and I'm not joking at all, I think things like philosophy and I guess things relevant to philosophy, but anything where there's sort of hardcore, not clear purpose, but thinking is going to become a much more desirable job skill as automation takes over shit, as it becomes really easy to create baseline apps and sort of reinvent things and sort of. So what we see as startup world progresses is the things that used to be hard become easy. And so, for example, it used to be if you needed to get a logo done, you could do it yourself. Or if you sucked, you'd have to find a designer. You'd have to negotiate with them, and you'd probably ask your friends and things like that. And then all of a sudden, now you go online, you Google get a logo done, and there's a million ways to do it. There's a million services. You can pay somebody on Upwork some money. You can use 99 Designs and have a contest run. You can go on Fiverr where they have fixed prices and they'll give you a logo. So a logo is the easiest thing in the world to get done today. What we're going to see happen so what we're going to see happen in 10 years is what we think of as difficult now is going to become easier. So making apps, right? Getting a developer for an app, you still need a developer. I mean, it's already easier than it was 4 years ago, and that white label solutions are definitely more usable than they used to be, but you still need a developer. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there's going to be so much freedom in in sort of the app building that there's going to be other areas that are harder. So building the app that's just an interface to your tech will be easy, but then you'll have the blockchain component, you have the AI component, you have a crypto component, whatever it might be. Building the app will be easy, and we're going to see what's difficult now or slightly difficult now become easy over the next couple of years.
Oh yeah, I mean there's already companies like Simba Chain coming up with no code solutions for building out blockchains, right? And the no code revolution pretty soon. It'll be easier than ever to whip up a blockchain app. So for job security purposes and the future of automation, any recommendations for students as far as pursuing careers?
No. So when we say job security, there's the next 10 years of security, and then there's the next 20 years of security. And those are just fundamentally different questions. For the next 10 years, a lot of the stuff that everyone's going to say, you'll be fine as an engineer for the next 10 years. Definitely. You'll probably be fine in most of what everyone's saying. I think after that is where people like you, philosophy, stuff like that, I think it's just going to surge. Art, anything where there's more of a combination of both talent and learned knowledge is going to be there. Where right now, a lot of the things are, of course, there are more talented engineers, but there is a degree to which you can sort of Uberize an engineer. That is, the reason Uber works well is whether you get one of the best drivers ever or the worst drivers ever, you don't really care if your driver makes right turns like so much smoother than somebody else. In fact, other skills come into play. Customer service, how friendly your driver is probably far more important than their technical driving ability. In the same way, we're going to see the Uberization of coding, and we're already starting to see this, where I can get certain types of code built where I don't really care so much about the developer. The best example of this is front end appearance code, so HTML and CSS, and even a lot of JavaScript stuff. For those who don't know, all web front ends are composed of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so those things, there's a company I deal with, a few companies, one in Ukraine, one in India, that all they do is take a Photoshop file and turn it into HTML, CSS, JavaScript, including front-end functionality. They take a few days, and it generally always works amazing. I've been using it for a few years now, but it's Uberized. I don't have any idea who's been working on that. Whereas I'm also working on an app now, and I have developers who work on a ton of different apps for me. And all those developers I know really well. I know them personally. That's where sort of personal and work life interact. So there's different, depending on the task, having somebody can be either trained in the skill and they're good to go, or you need somebody with emotional intelligence. You need somebody who you can work with, who has a collection of things. We are going to see the Uberization, I'm sure there's a better word for it, of a lot of tasks within fields, computer science, finance, and things like that. I still think there's cases in almost all fields for the next 10 years. After that, it's philosophy, it's maybe art, although AI is going to get pretty damn good at design. The question of whether or not it'll get good at art remains to be seen. But I think it's certainly going to be more soft skills focused 2030 beyond. 2020s, what you're doing now is probably good. Even if the field doesn't look the same 8 years from now, or 5 years from now, which it won't, my hunch is you'll be fine.
Nice. Well, some advice for students or things to think about. So I want to go back to, this kind of coding school that you founded, because I think that a lot of our student viewers will relate to it. When we started the university program, we wanted to get the temperature of like blockchain at universities. And what we found was that these were all, even the Berkeleys and MITs of the world, that largely these programs were very student driven, that it came from a demand for more education on the subject from the students. And so they were actually doing the work to teach themselves and teach each other. And then a lot of the courses that first started being taught at these schools were being student facilitated. So we went ahead right away and just started really focusing our efforts on kind of rewarding the people who were working at the grassroots to build this technology, and just supporting students, sponsoring their hackathons and events, running our own pitch competitions, trying to invest in student startups. But I just think it's interesting, your path of to entrepreneurship, or to what you're doing now, was so educational. You went out there and taught other people, or helped them get an education, and then you worked at Harvard. So maybe you could just speak more to your experience with the school and what you saw working with startups at Harvard as well.
Okay, so those are both good questions, but pretty different answers. So with the school, which is called Code Undercover, the whole idea was, if you have no money, it's still actually pretty difficult, very hard to get something built, anything that requires custom code. You can hire somebody on Upwork, for example. That's probably the cheapest, most quick option. Upwork is an example of trying to Uberize talent that I think fails in a lot of ways, by the way. But you can hire somebody on Upwork, and I have yet to this day to hear one successful Upwork story from people who are not Upwork experts. So I do know a lot of people in startup world who use Upwork and swear by it because they failed a few times first. I don't know anyone who had a successful first project ever, but I do know people who had who failed a few times and now they swear by Upwork. I have yet to find somebody who has gotten an MVP built on Upwork. And my general rule of thumb actually for Upwork is if you are quoted $2,000, you might actually get an MVP, just expect to spend 8 and don't be angry. So if you have an $8,000 budget, make sure that it is $2,000 is what they quote you at first. And when they come back to you and it is shittier than you could imagine, say, fix this, fix this, fix this, don't get angry. And eventually you'll have spent $8,000, but you have a product which, depending on where you're coming from, is actually a great price for an MVP. That being said, most people starting out don't have $8,000; they don't have $2,000. So it's very difficult. And Upwork is basically the cheapest option. Maybe Fiverr. Fiverr is an attempt to Uberize talent that I think works amazingly well, actually. And we can go into that conversation too, but that's a separate one. But so the whole idea was it's really hard to get something built. And I also knew a ton of people who spent months searching for a tech co-founder, not finding one, and then failing, and then just sort of giving up. So the whole idea here was, wait, what if somebody could really be their own tech founder? What if they could actually make an MVP, maybe raise some money off of it, maybe use that to get somebody who is a potential tech co-founder to join them? And so we did that, and that worked out really well for what we were going for. We weren't looking to scale a school. We weren't looking to be a General Assembly and take on money. But we had several hundred students, each who built it. Several students raised a few $1 million. At least 3 were accepted into Y Combinator's official program. Y Combinator has a few different collections of programs. If you, depending on how you count it, we had maybe 40 or 50 who have Y Combinator-like affiliations. You can go, but we have had a bunch of people actually make products. A minimum of 3 companies that are still in it today, and I do have confidentiality agreements with them. They are killing it. And if you Google me enough and sort of go through the Code Undercover website, you can get to them. There's a confidentiality agreement, but it's Googleable. But that was the whole idea, was be your own tech co-founder and make it so you can build your own product. Through that, I taught a workshop called Learn to Build Twitter in a Weekend. And the whole idea is you can not know any code and come in and learn to build basically a micro blogging site, very similar to Twitter. You can post, shouldn't call them tweets. You can post thoughts that are less than 140 characters and save them. And in some cases, follow people. But so that was a workshop we taught at Tufts. We taught that we actually taught it at WeWork back in the day. I have some stuff to say about them too, but we can save that for later as well. And so I taught that at Harvard Innovation Labs. And at the time that was Harvard's, the iLab's highest rated, I believe their highest rated workshop. If not that, definitely their highest rated technology workshop. And so I came back to teach for a few semesters, different workshops. Me and Abby, who was the assistant director there at the time, we would sort of work on stuff together and figure out what would be good to teach. We also did one called How to Speak Tech. We did Introduction to Twitter Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is a HTML CSS framework, basically how to make websites look sexy. It's a collection of pre-written code that you can use. And within 4 hours, you can go from knowing zero HTML to really making custom coded, sexy front ends of web apps, not back ends. The Learn to Build Twitter in a Weekend was a full stack one. In fact, I think I forgot to tell you this. That's actually a full-time company now. Me and a business partner actually just started learntocodeinAweekend.com. So we actually, you can take that Learn to Build Twitter in a Weekend class now. It's learntocodeinAweekend.com. And yeah, and so that's that. But and then so we had definitely some awesome students at Code Undercover, and I'm going to try to talk about students who are doing stuff at Harvard and then try to relate those themes. So Harvard, I was sort of the technology, the advisor there to the students. And so that was awesome. My job was to talk to students about how to make their startups not suck, how to make the good startups even better, how to make tech better. If they weren't interested in tech, but wanted to sort of talk about startup strategy and startup theory, we'd talk about that. But I mean, that was awesome. It was just a great time. I did notice that, so the interesting thing was at Code Undercover, they took technology advice quicker. They were quicker to learn tech, but I've yet to see people execute as quickly as those who executed at Harvard did. That was like on the non-technical realm, meaning if I said test X out, Harvard is very good at testing something and iterating on it. And for some of those more old school startup people, Lean Startup by Eric Ries, that's all about sort of releasing a product and iterating on it. And so Harvard students were definitely good at that. And I think that's an important skill, is to iterate on things. Now, people tend to take this to an extreme where they say, whatever your first product is, it doesn't matter. Come out with the shittiest thing possible and just iterate your way to success. Don't worry about the product. Don't worry about the problem you're solving. Just see what customers are saying and sort of, doesn't matter what you start with, eventually you'll iterate your way to success. And that doesn't work. There has to be a focus on solving some problem that your solution can address. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So you felt like the Harvard startups were quick to iterate, but you're cautioning people that you don't always want to just get a product out really quickly.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is, so you have, for any given startup, there is a problem you are solving, a solution you create to that problem, and a customer who has that problem and needs that solution. So that's any, working startup. And so all these things should work in tandem. You start out trying to solve some problem, you talk to some customers, and then you make some solution. Now, then you'll find out, all right, this solution doesn't actually solve the problem like we thought it does. So then you change the solution. And then you might go a little further and say, well, it turns out it doesn't matter what the solution is, this problem isn't worth solving. So you realize, that the real problem we're solving is not X, but Y. So once you figure that out, you might change the solution again. But then all of a sudden, you've changed your problem and you realize the customers you were looking at before no longer have that problem, therefore they don't need the solution. And so what real iteration should be is making sure the problem, solution, and the customer who has the problem and needs the solution all line up. What we tend to find, especially in startup world, for people who know what they're supposed to say but fail to execute, is they come up with some product and they iterate feature over feature over feature, and then they're like, this solution doesn't work, let me come up with a new solution. That solution doesn't work, let me come up with another solution. And maybe they'll change their customer, but they rarely actually focus on what problem they're solving. And they never get that problem, solution, customer who has the problem and needs the solution. Does that explain that better?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I think the code school is just such a great idea. I think we see the same problem in blockchain because it's such a new technology that there just isn't enough developers. And so we see really smart business students with great ideas, but don't know where to start as far as the tech. So I think that's at least what we're trying to do on the MouseBelt University side, and with our new startup school launching this month, is to kind of upskill these founders and give them, you know, some education behind blockchain technology, let them take some office hours with our CTO and kind of follow that model. So definitely think that's a great idea.
Yep. Yeah. So I think that yeah, blockchain is without a doubt sort of it could solve some amazing things, but it's been so glorified that everyone thinks it's a solution to everything. And the truth, my sort of rule of thumb is, if something can be handled on a server and doesn't need the blockchain, it should be. Now, there are some really cool applications that that could arise as a result of blockchain that I think are interesting. The one that I think is most interesting, in fact, it's the only one I think is interesting, is the notion that of blockchain and allowing for these autonomous companies to come up. That is, you throw Bitcoin out there. Bitcoin exists now, and there's not one server, there's not one group where if they go bankrupt, Bitcoin is done. And this applies not only to cryptocurrencies, but just sort of blockchain in general. I think the coolest thing that blockchain allows is that you can make something and then it exists, it's out there. Now, that is also taken to an extreme, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the tech, but somebody who really understands and I could also make a pretty good thing that a lot of good blockchains are not going to generate profit. That's another issue you have, is you do a startup to create something profitable when you can actually create something useful with blockchain, but it might be hard to drive profit off of that. And so we see that WordPress model a lot with blockchain, where so WordPress.org was created, and WordPress is this open source thing. And then you have WordPress.com, which is a way to monetize it, offer WordPress hosting and products. And so we do see that a lot with blockchain. I think it's going to be interesting, like what the first really mainstream blockchain app is, if there is one. And I don't think it's Bitcoin. I don't think Bitcoin is as mainstream. Whatever it is, I think whoever that founder is they're going to realize the potential of they can build it and themselves become irrelevant. And I don't know how that's going to manifest. And it also kind of flies directly in the face of classic startup theory, which is you need to iterate. So there's a lot of meaning you have to have a degree of control and be able to move fast and change things on the blockchain, which is not easy, or you could argue not really doable. So whatever is the first sort of mainstream blockchain thing, though, I think if it comes, we'll take advantage of that. And whoever does that will have created something really interesting. I think it's a minority of blockchain founders who are doing cool things with it, but there definitely are some. And I think it's good that there are people like MouseBelt who, you know, take startup theory into account. Sorry, groups, not people. MouseBelt is not a person, but who take startup theory into account and sort of and teach the, you know, it's not only about creating good blockchain tech, but also about making sure you're doing blockchain to solve a real problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's definitely plenty of startups in the blockchain space that they're just so excited about this technology and want to apply it to everything. You might have seen the same thing in the NFC RFID world, that this is so cool. Like, do we really need RFID for everything, or is a barcode just fine? You know, things like that. So in the blockchain space with startups, you know, people getting just so excited about the technology that they just want to blockchain. everything, and might not be solving a problem that anyone has, right? Where a private database would do the same job, things like that.
Yeah, completely agree. So yeah, take that example you gave with QR versus NFC. Both of them, while they can accomplish the same things, they solve very different problems. So a lot of people could, with our stickers, with the NFC, have said, well, with all this restaurant menus now, why don't you go into that business? And the answer I tell all of them is because we cannot do it as well. There are certain phone limitations that you might have with NFC, and they become less and less every month. So 6 months from now, we won't have those. But honestly, QR works for a restaurant. QR is less useful for meeting people because you actually have to open your camera, and both people have to prep themselves, even if it's only 10 seconds each, for the QR code process. Whereas with NFC, it's a really quick, one person has to have their phone screen on who's ever scanning, but they don't even need to go into their camera. And the other person doesn't even need to do anything with their phone. So they definitely solve different things. But yeah, so like restaurant menus, QR code's just better. And I'm not trying to take that space, and I'm not getting obsessed with the tech. And so that's another thing that we see a lot of founders do, is become so obsessed with the tech, they don't focus on a problem. So if we had tried to capitalize on the obviously in-demand restaurant menu space when COVID started, we would have been trying to solve, how can we make it easier for people to meet, and how can we make it easier for people to get their menus at a restaurant? But you can make an argument that the menu at a restaurant thing is a deeper business, but certainly not one we would figure out in the time to capitalize on that event. And also, it's not necessarily something you want to capitalize on. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So while you were at Harvard Innovation Labs, did you encounter any founders who were building on blockchain, or did you see any kind of trends as far as distributed ledger technologies during your time there?
Yes. So there are two that come to mind. So one, I think we had two ICOs. We probably had more, but I don't know if they were famous. So one company had an ICO, and I think it was the first one I don't remember their name, but I remember they had an ICO, and they raised a few $1 million on it. So they did relatively well. But my favorite one was a company, they're now called Hello Friend. And they actually are in that restaurant space now. And I think they're doing really cool stuff. They're doing QR and NFC, but they're focusing on their problem. Just because they have NFC, they're not trying to get into every NFC business. They're not trying to get into all this business, into a bunch of different businesses. But they started out doing blockchain work. I'm not sure if they're still utilizing the blockchain, but they've gone on to raise money and do things like that. And I am convinced that is because they are really, really good at aligning up problem, solution, customer. So that's why I can tell you, regardless of how they've pivoted with their tech or who their customer is, that the problem, solution, customer, they have always kept that in mind. And so they're doing some really cool things. I'm actually not sure if they still are utilizing blockchain. They might be.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, and sorry, separate from them, I can actually talk about another concept that we saw at the iLab,
yeah.
which is very interesting. So so I think the common theme that we've discussed is technology alone isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think blockchain is going to do some great things, but what we actually saw was too much of a focus on. So what we ended up seeing, this is around 2016, 2017. So it's interesting how technologies sort of fluctuate, and that I actually hadn't heard of blockchain for most of 2020 and 2019, but towards the end of 2020, it's so many people are talking about it again, and blockchains all of a sudden, super popular, back into the fold, all these things. But around 2016, 2017, we actually had an issue where several companies, I want to say like 8 or 9 of them were having an issue where they actually realized they're not blockchain companies. And so we had 2 issues. We had 3 companies that realized they had spent about 6 months making stuff on a server. And then they said, shit, we actually should have just used a blockchain. and so they switched to that. And then we had, I think 6 or 7 companies where they started out as blockchain companies and didn't want to continue using blockchain, but they couldn't make a public announcement because many of their investors were blockchain investors. And so that actually caused problems for them. And so they ended up just stopping to use blockchain. And so we definitely saw that a lot. And I think the moral of that story is that you have blockchain companies, the tech should never be the focus, right? So blockchain allows for some cool shit, focus on the cool shit. But when you say you are a blockchain company, you get caught up in blockchain, and you might not use blockchain, or you might be a company not working on blockchain that switches to blockchain. But again, technology is a tool. There's some TV show, I can't remember, I think it's called, am I allowed to quote a TV show? Are we going to have like
Sure.
copyright things here? I think it's *Halt and Catch Fire*, where one of the characters says, technology isn't the thing, it's the thing that lets you do the thing. And
love
so
that show.
yeah, I only made it past 4 episodes, and then I moved and I forgot I was watching it. So I need to rewatch it, but I did love it. And so there is, I think we'll see some really cool blockchain applications. My hunch is after their investor round, you'll never hear them referred to as blockchain. You'll hear them referred to as just awesome shit. Because again, the focus will be on what they do. Sometimes you hear, like, if Facebook decided to call themselves Graph Network Connections, right? Or the classic example is if Google had called themselves Search instead of Google, right? If they focus on what they're doing, okay, now I'm channeling a little bit of Simon Sinek here. So if they focus on what they're doing, they're on the wrong focus. They need to focus on why they're doing it. If blockchain is the tool, great. It's a new tool that will certainly come in handy for a lot of things. But if not, don't. And then just one other thing I'll say about that is we often hear a lot that crypto is cool, but blockchain is going to do so much more. I don't know why we discount crypto so much. I think crypto is actually a perfect example of what blockchain can do. I'm certainly not invested in any of it. I'm too conservative from a financial perspective. If I had, I'd be worth significantly more money. So you could argue I'm wrong, but I actually think crypto is a great application of blockchain. And this is a little tangent, but I think the thing that's stopping crypto from really replacing everything is actually our expectation that it will. The more we expect crypto to replace it, the higher the value becomes, and then it can't replace it because it's not really useful as a currency. And you really need something more stable that you don't expect to just sort of increase in value all the time a lot, right? That would be called, I am not a finance guy anymore, so if I'm screwing up economic terms, world forgive me. I'm not trying to be a pseudo intellectual here, but if we have that would be hyperinflation, which is not good. So anyway, so just to sum that all up, intense focus on what problem you're solving and what the technology you're doing, and from a solution perspective, what the tech allows you to do, not the tech itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see people, or at least people that I respect and agree with, say, the perfect use case of blockchain is crypto. So let's just perfect that first before we go all pie in the sky, blockchain for everything, identity, file sharing, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive in a little bit. I want you to, talk a little bit more about TAP and, how you came up with the idea, what's on the roadmap, how everything's going before kind of wrapping up with 2021. What do you see? What are your resolutions? But so thank you so much for telling us about, your experience at Harvard Innovation Labs. How did you get the idea to start TAP? And can you tell us just a little bit more about how it works and where people can find one if they want one?
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. So am I allowed to drop F-bombs?
I think you might have already.
I have? Okay. All right. So then we're good.
It's
All right.
fine.
So social media is allowed for a lot of cool shit, but it's also around a few years ago, I came to the conclusion that it basically fucked up the world. And you can forget politics. I'm not even talking about that. I am talking about that we no longer really communicate. So there is, and I love to relate stuff back to startup theory and about the problem you're solving. And so there's, you can make this argument that anytime you solve a problem, you create another 10. So I like to think back to, when Mark Zuckerberg was imagining the original Facebook, and he said, the internet's this amazing tool and we barely use it to communicate. Let's change that. And to his credit, solve that problem 100%. The internet makes it a lot easier for us to communicate, but he certainly, did solve a problem, but he created a fuck ton more. And this is not an anti-Facebook rant or anything. It's more of a social media in general and how we communicate rant. So I decided, communication was broken and that real world communication is very, very important. So a lot of people think that our mission to get people to interact in the real world again is a COVID-born mission, and it's actually not. So we started this thing in, I think, October or November of 2019 with the goal of let's make it as easy as possible to communicate in the real world again. And in order to do that, we need to, so actually, let me make this even a little bit clearer. We need to make it as easy to communicate in the real world as it is to communicate online. And what we need to do in order to do that is to decrease the opportunity cost of real world interaction. That is, I need to make it as easy for somebody to meet up in person as it would be to message them online. And that's very hard, and we're certainly very far away from that. Our first product is this sticker, which is, well, this is one of the stickers. We have a bunch of different designs. And so this is about, this just makes it quicker and easier to exchange information. And it really does work like magic. Just to give you all a demonstration, although I want to clear all the notifications on my phone because apparently I received a lot of texts during this thing. But here, I'm just gonna. Okay, so if you look at, any phone, we can simply touch a sticker to it. And I don't know how visible that was, but a push notification showed up when I did that. So I can just do that again. Yeah, see, and it shows up right away. I'm not in my camera. And the idea is now that if I go
their phone doesn't have to have the app.
Their phone does not have to have an app or a sticker. It'll show up on any iPhone that came out after the X. So it has to be, within the past, an iPhone that's been released within the past 2 years, and basically any Android phone. So any Android phone or anything like that. And this makes it easy to get people's, whatever info they want to share. But then also the main page of our app is our recent contact screen. So if you have the app, there's a lot of added advantage. You can see people you've met, and even without it, you can, even if you don't have a sticker, our app is a much better way to get phone numbers and get people's information in the real world. So my friend Logan, for example, before this, he was always at clubs. Now he's in Florida and he goes to bars basically every night. And so he can't remember women's names in the morning. And then actually also my friend Sophia has the same problem, also with women though. And so he would, before this, he'd meet people at a bar and he would go to see her and say, remind me to message, these people in the morning. Sophia is actually my favorite because Sophia is, she's a real player. So she would meet like 5 people a night. and she would write them down in notes so she would remember their names. Because if you just get a number, it's lost in your phone. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then a friend of mine actually, just before sort of COVID hit, started using this without stickers at conferences because he could get phone numbers and connect personally with people. And the main page of the app is recent contact. So if you forget somebody's name, you can you just look in your phone, and the people you met last night are there, whether you just got their phone numbers, whether they had a sticker or don't have a sticker. So it's a much easier way to connect with people. And right now we're basically 2 utilities. So we're far from our grand vision of making it just as easy to connect in the real world. But that's what we're trying to do. These stickers are actually free. So we're so convinced of our mission that you can just go to our website, which right now is tapsticker.com, and order a sticker, and we'll mail it to your house. No shipping, no nothing. We do ask that you set it up, that you don't just, let it sit there and put it on your phone. But right now they're free because we really just want to get people onto the network. We don't sell your data. We're not a data company. We're really just trying to make it easier for people to communicate. Now, if people want their logos on the sticker, we can do that too, and that we charge a fee for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we could get them for the whole MouseBelt team, because I'll tell
That'd be
you,
great.
we were conferencing a storm when we first started. So I just have, stacks of business cards, but that idea of having, like, if I met somebody at a conference and I run into them the next day and I kind of forgot their name, go scroll, who did I meet yesterday? Oh, that was Robbie or whoever. And such a great idea. And I love the mission. I have to say that it is one of my, I think, lifelong philosophical problems that I'm concerned with is communication breakdown. I actually wrote my thesis on how moral psychology and how we're supposed to interact with people who may have harmed us. And I think that involves, conversations that break down, especially online, around identity and privilege. So yeah, I love the mission. Definitely gonna get some tap stickers, and anyone who wants one, tapsticker.com. Yeah, great product. So for, just to kind of round out the conversation, this is our January event. It's kind of a 2021 theme. What's your New Year's resolutions? What are your crypto resolutions? What do you see for the next year? Do you have any predictions about blockchain or crypto, or just things you want to do with your company? So take that question however you like. Just kind of 2021, looking ahead, what's in store for you? What's your New Year's resolution?
Okay. I never do a New Year's resolution. I do every 6 months, I do try to make a goal of something I want to learn. And so right now my goal is actually outbound sales. I realized I think I'm pretty good at getting products to speak for themselves, at talking to people and getting them to see value. But it just occurred to me as I realized I'm going to need to be reaching out to conferences and other places with these stickers that I don't, basically since banking, and I certainly didn't learn a lot of it in banking, I haven't had to cold call or, message people or be that person who's trying to get some of their attention in a non-inbound marketing or just general marketing way. So right now I'm just talking to everyone I know who does outbound sales and really trying to do it. So that's, I guess, my New Year's resolution. Again, it's more like every 6 months. So, and that typically tends to fall sometime around May, June, and December, January. So that's New Year's resolution. And as far as this year, I'm just looking forward to the world opening up again. I think that's happening like now. I think it's going to happen sooner than we expect it to. And yeah, I'm just, really looking forward to everyone get, sort of re-entering Earth.
Yeah. Connecting in person again.
Connecting in person safely, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Philip. Any any other plugs that people, if you people you want to reach out to you, or anyone you're looking to talk to, or how they can find you?
Yeah, anyone who has a conference that wants stickers for it, any business that wants stickers for their employees, again, we can put your logo on them. We're starting to talk to some people in COVID testing facilities to give them, anyone who gets a test a sticker. So just anyone who sees a need for the sticker, whether that's bragging about your artwork, like personally, whether that's because you run a company, whether that's because you are at a conference, or whether it's because you like the environmental thing. And we're obviously, a lot less paper has to be made for this, because this is, the equivalent of thousands of business cards. It's not just one. You order a pack, and it's
Right.
also significantly cheaper for organizations with their logo on it. We're talking factors of, thousands and thousands of dollars cheaper for them, because they don't need to buy refills. You buy one and it's done. And then if the person gets the new phone, these are cheap enough where you end up you buy another one. And in some cases, we just send them to you depending on your experience. And so anyone who could use those sorts of things, please get in touch with us. Right now, our Instagram handle is @tap_sticker. We might actually change the name from Tap. So that also means we'll have to make brand new stickers, which means it's going to be your last chance to get our Tap design stickers, because those are going to go away. And so, yeah, so anyone in that
Limited
also,
edition.
yeah, and exactly. So also founders of networking groups. And then anyone who wants to learn coding, again, we have learntocodinaweekend.com. It's a weekend long class. And, full warning, it's an expensive class. TAP is free. The learntocodinaweekend.com is expensive. And yeah, but also our Instagram handle is @tap_sticker again. So please reach out. We'd love to hear from you all. And I wish the best to all founders. And I guess something I didn't say, which I wish I had, is if what you're talking about is already a buzzword, look for something else. That's usually a conversation piece that I bring up casually, and I realize I didn't mention it, but don't describe yourself as an X play. I just read an article today that dating is the most saturated thing. Now, that could mean that dating is still a huge problem worth solving, but it also means everyone's thinking about dating. So either come up with a brand, and I mean really new way of doing dating, or focus your efforts on something other people aren't focusing on. Sorry, that's a piece of advice I usually work into conversations, and I just forgot about it. So.
No, great. Glad that you were able to get it in. Well, thank you again. This has been another university segment of the Reimagine 2021 conference series. We've been talking with Philip Greenwald about startups and startup theory and advice for young entrepreneurs. So thanks again for joining us, and everybody stay tuned for more from Reimagine 2021.
Ashlie, thank you. This is great.